Hello and welcome back to the first full day of Words and Music 2021. As promised, we have an exciting hour of poetry. And if you are watching from Facebook or YouTube, you are watching this session for free. And one of the reasons that's possible is because of the generosity of many sponsors, such as the Poetry Matters Project. So to tell you a little bit more about them, here's Annie Bortz.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Annie Bortz, and I'm the marketing coordinator at the Poetry Matters Project. We are a Georgia-based organization that for the last 20 years has striven to create lasting community connections through poetry. If you'd like to learn more or if you're interested in collaborating with us, please find us on Facebook or check out our Instagram at Poetry Matters Project. Thank you so much to the Words and Music Festival and to One Book, One New Orleans. We are so thrilled to be a sponsor of this event tonight, and we hope you enjoy.
Thank you so much, Annie, and to the folks at the Poetry Matters Project. Not only Annie, but Lucinda Clark and Leah Martino. Thank you all so much for your work with us this year. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for this hour's session for the Love of Forum 21st Century Ghazals. This is Mark Neely. Mark Neely is the author of Beasts of the Hill and Dirty Bomb, both from Oberlin College Press. His third book, Ticker, won the Idaho Prize for Poetry and was published by Lost Horse Press in 2021. His awards include an NEA Poetry Fellowship, an Indiana Individual Artist Grant, and the Field Poetry Prize. He's a professor of English at Ball State University and a senior editor at River Teeth, the Journal of Nonfiction Narrative. Just a little bit about Ticker. His character Bruce will live in your bones for days after putting down that book. It's such an incredible collection. Everybody go pick up Ticker from the Words and Music virtual bookstore. And on that note, here's Mark Neely.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Megan, for all your organizing and for that very kind introduction. And hello, everyone out there. I can't see you, but I guess you can see me. So welcome to Words and Music. I'm delighted to be talking with a group of fantastic poets today, and we're going to be discussing the ghazal. I'm assuming most of you in the audience have some knowledge of the form, but I am going to give a very brief introduction. The ghazal is a poetic form that probably goes back almost to the 8th century CE, and I think that makes it, one of the oldest fixed forms that's still, being widely written today. And one of its most early famous practitioners was the Persian poet Hafiz, who wrote in the 14th century and is still, read widely. Other well-known poets associated with the form are Rumi, who wrote in Persian, Khalib, who wrote in Urdu, and the traditional ghazal is written in couplets, and they're wedded together with a series of formal constraints, including a refrain, which is a word or phrase that appears at the end of each couplet, and traditionally a rhyming word that precedes each refrain. And they often end with a signature couplet, which includes the poet's name. Perhaps the most difficult, and I think maybe the most alluring aspect of the form is the fact that the couplets are meant to be autonomous. As the Kashmiri American poet Agha Shahid Ali says, quote, "Each couplet must be like a precious stone that can shine even when plucked from the necklace, though it certainly has greater luster in its setting," which I think is just a fantastic, metaphor for how these poems are made to work. And for an excellent introduction to English language ghazals, I would suggest Ali's anthology called Ravishing Disunities, Real Ghazals in English. A fantastic book. It's meant a lot to me. So I'm speaking to you from Muncie, Indiana, and I just want to mention quickly that Shahid Ali actually went to high school at Burris Laboratory School, just a few blocks away from where I sit, which is kind of an interesting fact. His parents were in graduate school here at Ball State. And if you aren't familiar with his poems, I strongly recommend you look him up. I think he's a ravishing poet, one of the finest poets of the 20th century. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce our panelists. I'm going to introduce them one at a time, and I'll have them, they'll read a poem and maybe talk a little bit about it and as an introduction to their work, and then we'll get into some more discussion. So our first poet up will be Tiana Nobile, who is the author of Cleave from Hub City Press and was recently named one of the Gambit's 40 under 40. She is a Korean-American adoptee, a Kundiman Fellow, and a recipient of a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, a finalist of the National Poetry Series and Kundiman Poetry Prize, and her writing has appeared in Poetry Northwest, The New Republic, Guernica, and Southern Cultures, among others. She lives in Bulbancha, aka New Orleans, Louisiana. Welcome.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, Mark, for that introduction. I'm happy to be here and to be a part of the discussion around the ghazal. I actually first learned about the ghazal when I was an undergrad by my professor, Susan Gardnier, who has this book called Today, 101 Ghazals. And in it, she opens the book with a letter to Aga Shahid Ali, who some might say is the kind of godfather of the contemporary ghazal. And I just wanted to read part of it. So in it, she quotes him as saying, one of his least technical requirements for a ghazal is, what defines the ghazal is a constant longing. I just think that's really beautiful and something that I really hold close when I'm reading ghazals and thinking about writing them. So I'm going to read my one ghazal that I've written, or at least completed, that's in my book, Cleave, and it's called Petals. My mind is a clenched cocoon, a fist of grindstone petals. I was a dancer before I was born. My dreams spun on the loom, stuck in its petal. If I miss a step, snap and pirouette down the staircase, my feet will wrestle with the vines and the petals. I wish I knew time's seamstress. Eyelashes descend in petals. The past is a shoelace, caught on bicycle chains and pedals. I ran along the railroad looking for you, my mouth stale with wine and burnt petals. In the morning, you, moon, will be someone else, daughter of a million buried petals. Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you. Our next poet will be Brad Richard, who's the author of 4 collections of poems, most recently Parasite Kingdom from the Word Works, and his 4th chapbook, In Place, was selected for the 2021 Robin Becker series by Seven Kitchens Press. Recipient of numerous awards for his writing and teaching, he was named the 2015 Louisiana Artist of the Year. He lives, writes, and occasionally teaches in New Orleans. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you, Mark, for that introduction. Tiana, that was a beautiful poem. I think I was introduced to the ghazal by poet Andy Young, who I taught with at the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts. And I was fascinated by it. And as much as I've always loved forms that use repetition, like sestinas and villanelles, I found the ghazal particularly difficult to crack. So the first one I'm going to read for now is the first one that I wrote, which I think is kind of a cheat, but it's called Limestone Ghazal. My windowsills lined with fossils, whirled limestone remnants of ancient seas, lost bodies, now limestone. I've planted turmeric and borage, mustard and marigolds. Where do I pray my name takes root in time? Stone. The beauty of rocks is all weight and shape, a poetry of heft. Stevens, I also cry, stanza my stone. I spend all morning arranging words, and all they leave is a memory fainter than water on hot, dry stone. My mother calls. Her friend next door was evicted, had to move to a trailer in another county, limestone. In my dream, I'm trying to call home, but every number yields another dial tone. Ammonite, echinoid, gastropod, you had no name, alive in your sea, only now, when you're limestone. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we're all starting to see how flexible and varied this form can be. So I'm excited for this. Our next reader will be Daniel W.K. Lee, who's the author of The Anatomy of Want, published by Rebel Satori Press's Queer Mojo imprint. A third-generation refugee of Cantonese Chinese background, he was born in Kuching, Malaysia, raised in Chicagoland, grew the fuck up in New York City, embraced the outdoors and spinsterhood in Seattle, and now resides in the magical city of New Orleans with his aesthetic powerhouse of a dog, Camden. He has been widely published in online and print publications, including the Lambda Literary Award-nominated anthology Takeout, Queer Writing from Asian Pacific America, and the Lambda Literary Award-winning anthology I Do, I Don't, Queers on Marriage, and most recently, Love Jets, Queer Male Poets on 200 Years of Walt Whitman. Please welcome Daniel.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Before I start, I just want to, I'm working on my ableist assumptions. So I'm just going to describe this scene for those with low vision and or visually impaired. I am wearing a gray polo, and I have clear frameless glasses. Behind me is a white wall, and hanging is up art and some hoodies and a red towel. And also recognize that the land that is New Orleans, which is where I sit right now, is the original inhabitants are the Chitimacha. So I'm going to read. My ghazal is called, well, the refrain is the heart. A last ditch, her sorrow clamored to divine the heart. A stroke of madness before she could resign the heart. Throw open the doors for Shakespeare's teachers. Hear the crickets' sonnets enshrine the heart. The yogis disrobe. Serenity hangs off their ribs. It's simple, not a prayer, but a breath to align the heart. A little boy colors God hates fags in his confetti of hate. It takes such small hands to confine the heart. Every one of them the width of the Appalachians. For you too, I'm wiring explosives to mine the heart. So be it, she pleads to each repeated offense. The heart finds crueler ways to find the heart. Vulnerable or gullible, whatever you call it, in order, I get wasted off the wine, the heart. When affection is flung out as common as currency, even we beggars must decline the heart. Chet, you forgot about your funny Valentine. She's got the long legs that entwine the heart. Forlorn Medusa cannot tell dream from nightmare. Like a tomato, she picks off the vine, the heart. His eyelashes our daggers severing the jags. By brute force, they redesign the heart. Through all our modernism, postmodernism, and such, has it been style or habit to make less define the heart? Suppose Daniel became one among them, then let him, like all mistakes, refine the heart. Thanks.
Fantastic poem. Thank you, Daniel. One thing I like about Ghazals is they have cues for when something's about to happen. So when I heard Daniel, I knew that like the conclusion was coming. Following Daniel's lead, I will describe that I'm sitting in my office at Ball State in front of a green wall, mint green, which looked really good on like the swatch they gave me, but always reminds me of a dentist's office now. So I'm regretting that color. I'm going to introduce our last poet, who is Elizabeth Gross. Elizabeth is the author of This Body, That Lightning Show, selected by Jericho Brown for the Hilary Tham Capital Collection of the WordWorks Press, and Dear Escape Artist, a chapbook in collaboration with artist Sarah White. Their poem Ghazal at the End of the World was selected by Beth Ann Fennelly as the poetry contest winner for Words and Music Festival in 2020, and just came out in the Podunk Review. They teach interdisciplinary humanities for the honors program at Tulane University, and also co-organize the Waves reading series, which showcases the voices of LGBTQ+ writers. Welcome.
Thank you. And I too am calling in from Bulbancha. And behind me is a bookshelf and a brick fireplace. Yes. So I also have only ever written one ghazal, which I will read in a moment. I think my relationship with the form also began with Andy Young when I was a high school student of both Andy's and Brad's. And I remember that I was reintroduced to the form in grad school. And I'm sure I attempted as a high school student and also as a grad school student a ghazal, but my attempts were such complete failures that I don't even remember trying and failing. So it was very unexpected, actually, although I've enjoyed reading many contemporary ghazals, that this poem came in April 2020. Ghazal at the End of the World. Don't tell me you don't feel it too. Relief. Something finally stopped, all of us at once, like a whistle in the schoolyard, freeze, on one leg balancing, finally stopped. The clear green waters of Venice, flowing with dolphins and swans, are just a fantasy glimpse of a post-polluted world. Our high emission flying finally stopped. Experts say the mask I wear outside protects you more than me, but they don't know the pleasure I feel not recognizing my own reflection in car windows when out walking. That mirror gazing finally stopped. Erasing my spring calendar, I dimly recall how many times I've wished to slow down time. Not like this, of course. Now the future begins somewhere years from now, when this suffering finally stops. One of my neighbors died. The rest of us stood on our porches, watching paramedics float around the purple house in their protective gowns, trying to guess whose breathing finally stopped. My concentration is shot. I'm not writing. I can only read the things my students ask me to. Soon I'll submit their final grades and this hydra-headed semester will be done. Teaching finally stopped. Alone in the house for months, I lose the sense of where my edges are, expanding until I imagine draping these walls around my body like a robe. All other daily dressing finally stopped. It was hours before Mr. James stepped out of his purple house to say his nephew passed. Relatives arrived, distant until a downpour drove them close, the rain long past when their wailing finally stopped. On another endless video call, the birds outside trigger my microphone to unmute as my days stretch on, screen-bound, indoors, waiting for someone else to finally stop the Zoom. I focus on my virtual backgrounds, dolphins, light moving against green leaves, aquarium scene. I can make parts of myself disappear by drinking from a glass, reverse genie summoning, finally stopped. I lost my job, not right away, like so many I love who are struggling now. But after quarantine, I'm never going back to the work, the office I love. Our thoughtful planning finally stopped. From here, summer is an unthinkable hot blank, and yet I long to leap for it. I try to explain to an internet friend that I don't have to be this Elizabeth anymore. All that performing finally stopped. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here and hear all these fantastic poems. As a teacher myself, I'm definitely feeling the phrase Hydra-headed semester right now. So thank you for that. That may be in my head forever now. So thank you all for introducing us to your work. I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about what drew you to this form. And I know some of you have written, very few of these, but what drew you to this form, or what draws you to sort of strict forms in general? And, anything else you'd like to talk about in terms of ghazals, fixed forms, any place you want to go would be great with me. So I just got done teaching, so I don't feel like calling on people. So whoever wants to go first, just jump in.
I'll jump in. I think of the writers here, I've probably written the most of them. I've written about 20 of them, of really the Persian variety, as close as I can to them. I was introduced to them by the late great Aga Shahid Ali. His poetry, reading his poetry was really, his work was the first to make me weep openly in public spaces. So when I first discovered in his book Rooms Without, oops, I'm forgetting now. Rooms Are Never Finished, I think. There are several ghazals in them, and I was just captivated. And I'm somewhat an arch formalist in that I like to kind of dive into the most stringent requirements and visit the traditional content of those forms. So most of my ghazals are very, very strict with the refrain, with the repetition, the rhyme scheme, kind of almost everything in a Persian ghazal I kind of incorporate, except for I do have enjambment between the two lines of the couplets. It's really kind of his work that and drove me to it. And I become, interestingly, a lover of formal poetry. And I think how I kind of see formal poetry is this kind of lovely prison that I have to write myself out and through by, like, the bars of the prison I must cover it with a kind of language that the reader can clock something's there, but isn't necessarily locked in. Even though personally I'm trying to write myself out of it. And so that it's not just the ghazal. In my book, Anatomy of Want, I have a sonnet series that I think I've kind of done the same thing with. So that's kind of my approach in general. But I'm kind of like, it's the challenge of it all, especially because there are so many restrictions in it that I keep on going back to it. That's it.
I can go ahead just because I have a very different approach than Daniel. I think I very, very rarely write in form. But I find that what brings me to form is when I'm feeling really kind of stuck, and I need some, I think a form can act as a prompt to writing something new. So yeah, like I said, I've written a villanelle maybe once in my life, or like I've written sometimes, especially now I feel like there's so many exceptions to the rules where people are like, oh, it's a 14-line poem, now it's a sonnet, we're just going to call it a sonnet. Brad doesn't agree, but people say that. So I guess I was like, oh, I didn't mean for that to be a sonnet, but in a workshop someone calls it a sonnet, so I'm like, okay, I'll take that. But I think, yeah, for me though, I definitely turn to form when I'm trying to push something that I haven't really quite been able to do just through the blankness of a page. And I have a different opinion of Daniel too, in that I think that maybe also because I'm thinking about it more loosely, I feel like a ghazal has less requirements. It's just couplets, the second, and there's that echoing word at the end, or phrase at the end. And I find that there's a container that feels very kind of flexible to me when I wrote my one ghazal, and I tried to write other ones, but I think to get to that ending phrase or word, it becomes like a fun journey. And then I really do love that self-referential piece at the end, but it does feel a little bit more malleable to me than other forms.
I'll jump in. That was great. I think I'm somewhere maybe between Daniel and Tiana. But I'm very much with Tiana on loving coming to form for help, right? When I'm having difficulty just finding something to write about, or in the case of the next poem I'm going to read, knowing what to do with a draft that I know isn't working. Sometimes putting a free verse poem into form forces a kind of scrutiny that I wouldn't otherwise put onto the material, that makes me see it in a new way. I am very much with Daniel in terms of the strictness of the form, and that's part of what I like about the ghazal, is having to use the rhyme, having to use the refrain, having to think about keeping the lines of the couplets more or less the same length, although I violate that in the one I'm going to read. But another one of the things that draws me to the form is the way it encourages strong emotion. The way that is such a huge part of the tradition, and the performative nature of that. Even though tonight I'm performing this in front of an audience, but mostly people will just be reading on the page. But I like that sense. So let me go ahead and read this one. This is a very different ghazal from the one I read earlier, and it's called 4 a.m. Fuck, this sprained foot keeps me awake all night. When will those pills kick in? Will they take all night? Slumped in my reading chair, my legs propped up, stuck in a weird salute. I'm forbidden to break all night. Another episode of The Walking Dead. Yes, skip the intro. Wish I had enough weed to stay baked all night. What art could twist virgin feet, dread feet? Did those feet? Mind-forged collage of William Blake all night. Some dumb thing I said rolls its ball of dung in my brain, then buries it inside me, a brooding ache all night. I shift the ice pack, rewrap the bandage, it hurts worse. What mistakes will I remake all night? Crutches, oxy, doctor's bills piling up, so much shit I can't forsake all night. Touch the bottom of these sleepless hours, I'll drown, treading water in the middle of a lake all night. Pain lights up my window. like daybreak all night. Brad, it's Mom. Sleep, baby. But you're dead. So who keeps vigil for my sake all night?
I love it. I just want to jump in very quickly, because Brad, you brought up the performativity element, and I've read there's in performing ghazals that there is the shayer, the one who's performing or has written the ghazal, and in an audience, especially we'll say in Iran or something, when they catch the rhyme scheme, they can anticipate the refrain. So in performing, they'll stop after the rhymed word and let the audience see the refrain, which I think is really kind of marvelous in terms of we kind of like reignite this or remember that poetry isn't just written word, but it is an oral tradition. And so that's another element that I do think is really wildly, fun and fascinating, that it is really kind of centered around music. And so I'm always striving to get, my ghazal closer to, or as close to music as possible.
That's so interesting about the audience filling in the refrain and makes sense. And also I feel like connects to my experience of working with a form alone without that aspect. Thinking back to also, I love what Tiana shared about what defines a ghazal as a constant longing, which I hadn't heard before in this panel, but that like call and response aspect, even within one voice of the poem, of kind of a back and forth with the form, that I think allows the ghazal to hold a special kind of loneliness without tipping into something else. Like also really, really the other comments about kind of emotional extremity is what resonates with me the most, and about what called me to write this particular ghazal, which basically I wrote because Toy Derricat told me to in a workshop through New Orleans Writers Workshop, which was going on early in the pandemic. And as others have mentioned, I am also drawn to formal poetry in general in times of crisis. So like, although I don't generally consider myself a formalist as a poet, I've written basically exclusively formal poems for the past few years because crisis. And the ghazal, I was thinking about like why, like how my one ghazal happened, and why it felt appropriate to the moment, particularly having enjoyed reading ghazals by other poets. Someone who hasn't come up yet, I think, is Marilyn Hacker, who was definitely a model for me with my ghazal. But I hadn't felt like the form was for me, although I had experimented with it until this poem at this time. And writing towards a known endpoint felt helpful in this period of interminable uncertainty. So that's the part that stuck out to me. Knowing where each couplet is going, and that it will stop there before moving on to the next thing, helped me process those early months of the pandemic shutdown. And yeah, I have another poem that I'll read that also that's more recent, but also involved writing towards a known. The last word of every line is the same word or some play on that word, although otherwise it's like very loose. A Song at the End of the World after Sharon Olds. When all this is over, I told myself I'd go straight to the ocean and throw myself in, running past the whooshing wave breaks to submerge myself in deeper swells. I sometimes think the ocean calls my name, and I call back, ocean, ocean, from wherever I am. I don't live near the ocean, though I suppose it's getting closer. Last fall at a Zoom reading, Ocean Vuong defined queerness as failing towards joy, and all the motion of my mind stilled to hear them say that. In their square, Ocean's face was framed by lush houseplants. I scanned the little boxes above an ocean of listening faces, including Sharon Olds, and felt a little emotional seeing the hot pink butterfly clips in her hair and the devotion of so many poets gathered across various time zones to hear Ocean read. Yesterday, I read Sharon Olds' poem in The New Yorker and had a notion to send it to my friend Bear because it had their name all over it, and did, which opened the window in my mind this poem slipped into, more like a leak than a crashing ocean wave. It was also raining hard, and I checked all the windowsills for leaks. No ocean again yesterday, but I did get to the pool. Wanting the ocean, but not trusting the crowds, months ago, my mother and I drove to Ocean Springs. I waited well beyond the pier, imagining the ocean beyond the Gulf. Even this far out, the waters just skirted my waist. Filmy wisps of suntan lotion spiraling into brown water, but it still felt good to float. And then came some commotion as a pair of pelicans, such graceful dinosaurs, glided low. So close in, I held my breath. When it was okay again to fly, I didn't go to the ocean, but did swim in the river every day and otherwise indulged in pleasure worthy of ocean, days and nights as crammed with beauty as the Barnes collection, where I also went and suddenly over-identified with every lounging nude, open to finally failing towards joy, which can also move like the ocean I'm learning inside me, an ocean.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I did want to mention one thing that we've been talking about, which is the call and response aspect. And one thing that I do when I have a class, like poetry class, I can't quite get them going. This is my trick to get them going is I read a ghazal. Usually I read Aga Shahid Ali's Tonight, which is, I think, like one of my favorite poems ever written and just absolute gem of the form. And I do it in a call and response with the class, and like 100%, it never fails. It always like gets people excited and sort of worked up about poetry. And I mean, the next class, they might go back to, not wanting to talk or being sort of like down or whatever, but it's just it is such a reminder that poetry, comes from an oral tradition and it has that orality about it, and that it is like such an active form. I mean, it's such a participatory form. So that's one thing that I love about poetry in general and the ghazal specifically. So, Tiana and Daniel, do you want to read something else since we heard from the others?
I've got something. This one's called In the Dark. Not just mine, but your intentions stain in the dark. Rechristened temptation gathers like rain in the dark. By what regime of lotion, jeans, or God are such soft slopes justified in being vain in the dark? Smash the dinner plates for this extinguished distance. I'll pour the shots, darling, to drain in the dark. The clothes measure a man? Says who? When patterns from paisleys to pinstripes are all plain in the dark. Oh, blameless boy of the bare way we failed you, you were, with no wind, a weather vane in the dark. Wherever God's hiding the cure for your death sentence, for you, I'm overturning every grain in the dark. When all else is hijacked, I'll leave you the hymn. The ear never loses the refrain in the dark. Is the dark pitiless to prolong the punishment? Reliving your whisper is worth the pain in the dark. Before caving in to lips pursed into an apology, give me a chance to at least complain in the dark. Silence, be warned, is a consummate politician, an ally in light, bane in the dark. A toast to ignorance for prolonging bliss. Why sober a thrill if we remain in the dark? I fall into fantasy. How do I know? You're saying this word yours, Daniel. Could you explain in the dark?
So I just wanted to agree with something that Elizabeth said earlier, that like the sense of the certainty of arrival to that end word or phrase being kind of like soothing, or there's like, because you know that you're going to get there. And I definitely, that resonates with me. Whereas in other forms like the sestina, I feel extremely contained by that in that way that feels very stressful and anxiety driven. So I think I'm particularly interested in forms and ghazals in particular that kind of subvert certain expectations, and whether it be through like homophones or like interesting enjambment. And I'm gonna read. This isn't a poem of mine. I hope that's okay. But it's a ghazal by Tarfia Faizullah, who's a Bangladeshi American poet. And the first time I read it, I didn't even realize it was a ghazal. I think just like it just blew me away. And then I went back, I was like, oh my God, there's like so much happening here. And I just wanted to share it with you all. So it's called Self-Portrait as Mango by Tarfia Faizullah. She says your English is great. How long have you been in our country? I say, suck on a mango, bitch, since that's all you think I eat anyway. Mangoes are what margins like me know everything about, right? Doesn't a mango just win spelling bees and kiss white boys? Isn't a mango a placeholder in a poem folded with burkas? But this one, the one I'm going to slice and serve down her throat, is a mango that remembers jungles jagged with insects, the river's darker thirst. This mango was cut down by a scythe that beheads soldiers, mango that taunts and suns itself into a hard-palmed fist only a few months per year, fattens while blood stains green ponds. Why use a mango to beat her perplexed? Why not a coconut? Because this exotic fruit won't be cracked open to reveal whiteness to you. This mango isn't alien just because of its gold-green bloodline. I know I'm worth waiting for. I want to be needed for ripeness. Mango, my own sunset-skinned heart waiting to be held and peeled. Mango, I suck open with teeth. Tapé, this is the only way to eat a mango.
Fantastic poem. Love that. And beautifully read, of course, also. Yeah, this is really exciting to be able to talk to you all. And I was just wondering, we'll probably see if the audience has questions here in a few minutes, but you know, we've got some amazing poets and thinkers in the room. So is there anything you'd like to ask each other, either about the ghazal or about, you know, anything poetic, I suppose?
I would love to ask Daniel, because he has written so many, and I love yours are so incredibly sensual, and they're just so lush. And I'm just, what is your process for writing a ghazal, excuse me?
It's actually pretty it's kind of funny. When I started writing more and more, I kind of approach it more, I'm not sure what the word is, but like in a more regimented way. I would start writing um, like rhyme words. And so I just actually have like a Word document that's kind of like, you know, like light, flight, something like that, you know, and there'll just be lists and lists of them. And then I just kind of amble through life and I figure out like what would be an interesting refrain. And then I'll write those refrains down. And then I just kind of like will just stare at this, you know, my computer screen. And sometimes just like there'll just be these pairings that kind of like emerge. Um, that's not typically how like any of my writing actually happens. It's far more happenstance and more ridiculous. But yeah, I think what's so great and I love is that we were talking about earlier is you're kind of writing it to a destination. So I kind of picked what my rhyme scheme is going to be and what my refrain is going to be. I just kind of like fill it in. And because I'm so heavily influenced by Shahid, I think though, like I'm kind of just also veering towards these elements of like either like interrogations of God or desire or love or homoeroticism, or you know, and then trying to like break them up with, because I'm still very invested in this you know, Shahid's idea where you can pluck out a couplet, a share, and then, you know, and it should be its own poem, and making sure that there isn't too much unity. You know, I want to actually put disunity in there so that there's different kind of resonances in the ghazals. So it's a little bit, I guess, strategic or with an agenda, but yeah, I just kind of like putting all the parts together and like letting it swirl in my brain and in front of my eyes and kind of waiting for things to happen. And I've been fortunate that lightning has struck at least 20 times.
Yeah, they're great. I love how much I love all the material gathering that you're doing to like always be ready for that. That's really cool. With 4 a.m., that's the one where I took a poem that wasn't working and revised it as a ghazal, sort of for this panel. So I'd have one more poem. I think All Night was already in the original draft. So it's like, oh, that really sounds like a ghazal refrain. You know, there's something big and yearning about repeating the phrase all night. And then, yeah, I started a list of rhyming words with take. And yeah, that saved me. That, like, you know, choosing the ones that seemed to work in interesting ways or contrast each other in interesting ways. Yeah, that gave me everything I needed to work with.
I want to put out a quick pitch to the audience. If you're out there and you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat and we will answer it for you. And I'll keep my eye on the chat over here. What else do you all, any other things you want to talk about? Ask.
I have something. I would like to talk about the signature in the last line, because thinking about what stopped me from trying a ghazal in the past, that was a big part of it. And I, so much of my ghazal at the end of the world is about like self relationship to self, like through the pandemic. And I think actually like spending time on Zoom interacting with my own face like made it possible for me to consider putting my name in the last line of a poem in a way that I you know, like that was one of the things that was like, I mean, like, this is beautiful in its original context. I understand what's happening here. I understand what's happening in these poems that I love, and it's not for me. I couldn't imagine wanting to do that. And for my ghazal, actually, the signature came in, like, I refused to do it in earlier draft. It came in a later draft of the poem. It was where I realized, it was like, oh, this is actually the opportunity to do that thing. And I understand something about why a poet would want to, and what that does. Like, I'm not sure that I can explain it, which is why I'm also asking. But it was definitely something that intimidated me about even attempting the form for a long time. So wondering what your feelings are about it, what your approach is to the inclusion of the signature.
I think that was something that put me off in my first one. I avoided it. I talked about the names of the creatures of whose fossils I had. But I really love I think of it in terms of the performative context of the form, and that, it's like, I am the poet, here's my name, and I love that. I love that it's a public celebration of being a poet. And we don't, yeah, that's not something we do so much, I don't think.
Yeah,
And by we, I mean America.
I almost think of it as like the breaking of the fourth wall, right? Like, I read a lot of first person or like hyper personal poetry, but it's still like the speaker. And then the ghazal is like, oh no, like, it's like, I'm gonna name me. Like, I'm gonna actually position this myself in it in a totally different way. Yet, and so I get the sense of like that feels very exposed. But yeah, I think I think about it as like a breaking of the fourth wall.
Yeah, I love the intimacy that it brings in, because the form is very, to me, like very like explosive, religious, international, global. It's big, and it the best ghazals, I think, fly around all over the place, and then to have that intimate moment of introducing, the poet's name, I think it's just it's like one of its great tricks of the form, that for some reason just has worked for all these, hundreds of years.
Yeah, I kind of think of it, or initially I just kind of thought of it as a fascinating quirk and another challenge, and how to incorporate some kind of name. It doesn't, the signature, so to speak, it doesn't have to be your actual name, right? Um, but again, because these are, independent couplets, traditionally, I just thought of it as just kind of a nice way to kind of incorporate this moment where just the name, because I don't necessarily use it every time to refer to myself. Like, in one ghazal that I've done, I I reference the book of Daniel in the Bible. So it's not me at all, but I'm just kind of like using that as a kind of setup to make another point. So there's kind of creative ways to incorporate whatever signature there is, or just kind of just throw it in there and just make it like a reference to someone someone like you might know or whatever, and just happens to have the same name or whatever. So yeah, I never really kind of put too much personal and invest into in terms of including it. I just thought it was just kind of an interesting device, and as a way to kind of sign off on what you worked, or what you've written. But fundamentally, I mean, in reciting or whatever, you can just throw it away. Not feeling it, don't like that couple today, just throw it out. I'll read things that I'm like, that couplet, not really feeling it today. I'm just gonna read the other ones.
think the audience is being a little silent with their questions, so we'll just keep going. I will say we're kind of getting close on time, but I would say if you're the type of person out there who likes to give gifts in the next couple months, give someone a gift of a book of poetry. And I can think of 4 authors that you might want to start with, and they're all in the room. So, and I know some of you have new books out, so there it is. Oh yeah, or that. Beautiful. So yeah, even if you don't think they like poetry, I give people books of poetry all the time, and it's not, they may be someone who's never read a book of poetry, but that might be the moment where they decide they do want to make that a part of their lives. Anything else you all want to talk about here at the end?
Yeah, I would just say, try it. Sometimes, as we kind of talked about before, you get stuck, and nothing like giving yourself a challenge to maybe, jar you out or get you out of the rut in your creativity. Yeah, and personally, I would say try it the hardest way possible. Every single rule, try it and see what happens.
And it looks like we do have one question, which is, for those of you who teach puzzles, how do your students respond to either reading or writing them? I'll say that when I've usually introduced the Ghazal in the context of, like, maybe we've been working solely on the sonnet and the villanelle, and then it's like, okay, here are some other forms that are, just other forms for you to consider, other forms for you to try. And so maybe a student would choose it, and it was amazing how some students just really, really strongly connected with it. It's like it was the form they were looking for to write a certain poem. So I guess for me, it's been sort of hit and miss, but I was rarely intentional with teaching it. I was just offering it, on a plate of other options.
Yeah, I like to teach. I like to offer students as wide a variety of forms, authors, because they're going to connect to one or the other. And some people are going to try to write a sonnet and be like, this is terrible. I hate this. Why are you making me do this? And I don't make people, write in specific forms. I offer them up. But I've had great experience with it. And I often teach it sort of in conjunction with the blues form, which is similarly very strict and has a refrain, and then sort of talking about like repetitions and refrains in general. So I think it can open up like huge conversations about poetry.
That's so interesting, because now you're making me think about Natasha Trethewey, who has done both. That's so interesting.
We're pretty much at the end of our time here, so I just want to thank you all for talking with everyone today, and it's wonderful to see you all, and thank you everyone in the audience for being here, and thank you to Words and Music. This has been so fun.
Thank you all. I love whoever's got church bells going off. It feels very, very much like a natural, beautiful end to the musical Ghazal.
Guilty over here.
That's fantastic. I love that. We all need church bells every day to mark the hour. So speaking of the hour, we are at 6 o'clock right now. We are coming back at 6:30 with the keynote event for Words and Music 2021, which is How the Word is Passed with Clint Smith and David Robinson Morris. I'll see you again in half an hour. Thank you so much for that beautiful discussion.